Okay, so I think I'm like the last one in my entire Facebook news feed to do something with the ALS challenge. I was challenged by Pastor Cheryl Henson and Pastor Matt Sturdivant, who both did something a little different. Pastor Cheryl dumped the ice water on herself during a children's message in worship, and Pastor Matt didn't do the water. He actually did two of these empathetic exercises that are supposed to help the rest of us simulate what it might be like to live with ALS. What I decided to do was take my phone around with me and get a couple of sentences from those that I know who have had loved ones suffer and die from the ALS disease, just for you to be able to hear what they have to say.
We were doing feedings, and his was going all night for 10 hours. And the thought behind that being that if he wanted to do activities during the day, that would free his days to do that. So we did the feedings all night. But at that point, at the time he needed the tube feedings, he just didn't feel like doing anything during the day other than just staying home.
He couldn't feed himself. He couldn't wipe his nose. He couldn't take himself to the bathroom. He couldn't love anybody, with his arms. People had to feed him. He couldn't go get a drink of water. Couldn't scratch his head. All those things that we do without even thinking. I took him to church and other people fed him. How that must have bothered his pride because he was a person in control. It just marvels that he was as gracious and as humble as he was.
I think probably the most difficult part for him was not having control. He didn't really like to ask for help. He liked to be the helper. So having to rely on other people to do things for him was really hard.
What do you think the hardest part was for him?
Losing his abilities. Losing his abilities to do the things that he always did. He was always very self-sufficient and active outdoors, and I think that would be not being able to go fishing.
So what was the hardest part for you?
Being patient. And, because I would sit down and, would you scratch my head, or would you scratch my nose, or, oh, you got in there too far, just stuff like that.
So we would get a solution to something figured out, like he couldn't hold a book anymore. Okay, well, we got him a Nook that he could swipe, so it would sit on the table in front of him and he would swipe his hand across to turn pages, and within a couple of weeks of getting that, he could no longer do that. So we would just get one solution figured out, and then he would have progressed beyond it.
So what are your thoughts on the new awareness about it and the Ice Bucket Challenge? And
I'm excited, and to see that they've gathered 100 million, isn't it?
So what do you think of the whole Ice Bucket thing that's going around?
I think it's awesome. It's not only raising funds, but raising awareness, which I have struggled with as a surviving spouse, to figure out how we could raise awareness. There's such a small number of people that have ALS at any given time.
So I think understanding that everybody's circumstance is different, so even if you've known someone who's had ALS, the next person you know may have a completely different cycle.
So when I first started seeing these Ice Bucket videos, I wrote it off as the latest form of social media slacktivism. But since hearing from families that have dealt with ALS, I've begun to say, if they're for it, I'm for it. But since I can't really think of too many people who haven't already poured ice water on their head, I have a different challenge for all of us. You know how we've been learning about what it's like to live with ALS? Why don't we all practice empathy every day? Each day, try to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, or ask questions that would teach us how another person experiences life differently than we do. That's really my challenge to all of us. But, okay, just for good measure. I challenge Braden Fields.